Hello, viewers. Welcome to yet another exciting edition of the Diaspora Connect Show, where we celebrate Zimbabweans who are doing amazing things in the diaspora. And joining me this morning in the studio is a phenomenal woman, director of UC Compliance, an advocate for women of color in Australia, and she's also a podcaster and an author. Let's welcome Christine Mudavanhu.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I know you're a busy person, so to give us your time is like amazing for us to be able to, to get to speak to you and hear about your journey. So to start with, outside of all those things that I've mentioned that you do and that you're doing, who is Christine?
It's interesting because that's usually the question I start with in my podcast too, where I ask people, who are you? And I am the proud daughter of Rafael and Mavis Mudavanhu, two entrepreneurs that set up a business in the late 70s, early 80s in Chegutu. Chegutu is a very tiny little town that had no traffic lights. That's the town that raised me. That's the town where, when I go back now, I just feel most at home. And the funny thing is, when I was young, I couldn't wait to get out. Like, that place was so small. I was like, I am out of here. The minute I turned 18, I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I am a daughter. I am a sister. I have got, there's seven. I've got 6 siblings, so there's 7 of us to have passed on.
Oh, sorry about that.
I am also a mother to Tamuka, who is my only child, and he knows it. He's my only child. I am a community advocate. I'm somebody who doesn't shy away from speaking up for things that I believe in, particularly the empowerment of the girl child, because I was raised by a man who empowered me. And so I never grew up feeling like things were impossible for me. And that's because I was raised by a dad who literally treated me like a princess, which, spoiled me for a lot of things, but also instilled in me that everything is possible for me. I'm a Christian. I believe in God. I am a humanitarian. I believe in human rights. I believe in fairness for everybody. So that's a little bit of me.
I love that. I love that you were brought up as a princess. So when do you move from Zimbabwe?
So I was always leaving Zimbabwe.
Okay.
Mentally. I had the privilege of having a really beautiful education in Zimbabwe. I had a wonderful childhood. I went to what I think is the best school, Brighton Country School, which is a little private school in Chegutu, which we were the founding kids of that school, and it's still there, and it's still one of the best schools in the country, even today. And the legacy of that school and what it taught us and the safety that we just felt in that place really solidified a lot of things for my childhood, the level of confidence that I had in the future, because in that environment, everything was possible. We all talked about the countries that we would go and see, and I've gone to many of them, the places we would live. So for us, going overseas was not an if, it was a when. And that was pretty much my experience. And I know that, other people's experiences are different. I'm just sharing mine.
Yeah.
And then I had the privilege to go to Watershed College. After that, another really great school. I think at Watershed, that's where I learned I was Black. And I know that's going to sound really odd to say, but when I was at Brighton, we were very naive. We were in a little bubble. We were in a town. It's not that you didn't know that you weren't Black, but I didn't know it was a thing. And remember, I grew up in post-independence Zimbabwe. So although I was born pre-independence, in 1980s when we got independence, I was literally raised in post-independence Zimbabwe and almost the glory days of it, right? Where, there was a lot of embracing, and in that little town embraced us. But when I moved to Watershed and I moved to Marandera, we had people that came from all different communities. And that's where I think I first confronted a lot of racism. And that's when I remember on our first day of school, because I went into boarding school, I was 13 years old, and that's quite common in Zimbabwe. So I went into school, and there was a father who really didn't want their child, who was a white child, sharing with a black child. So, when you come into high school, you come from all sorts of places. So you gravitate to people who's come from your old junior school. I had a couple of kids from Bryden, and so we gravitated initially towards each other. But obviously you get to know other people. And so these two had come from the same school. And so we had things called cubicles, where we had 2 beds in a cubicle, and we were allowed to pick who we could share with. So these 2 girls picked each other. The father kicked the biggest fuss. I do not want my child sharing with that black person. Like, you could tell how embarrassed the mother was by the whole situation. And this man made a huge, huge fuss. And that was when I was like, wow, right. And so that changed the trajectory for me of how I saw myself. We weren't just friends. There was actually an actual divide. It was kind of like you're 13 years old and you're kind of like, oh my God, so this is a thing, When I was in junior school, I used to suntan. I joke about it now. I used to put sunscreen on, and I say, I got tan lines. I was just hanging out with my friends. It wasn't a thing. I knew that I had brown skin. I knew that I was an African child, but it wasn't the thing that defined me. Whereas when I got to high school, it was now this defining thing. And so the first year was really learning that. And, and that sort of started to shape who your peer groups became, because you now became more acutely aware of your blackness. Then you started understanding, the whole liberation struggle. You started understanding about colonization, because more of, you're now going to history classes and you're now being taught all of these things. Because when you're a kid, particularly at that time, you're just growing up in this naive bubble, and for me, life was good. My dad was this entrepreneur who was building a business. He was running around trying to, so I spent a lot of time in his car with him, delivering, meat to his clients and things. So that was my world. It was so tiny. It was so small. So we weren't talking about, massively big things, and that whole divide, I think for me, really came alive when I entered high school, more so than when I was in junior school.
I'm just thinking, as you said, was it really a thing during that time?
In high school? It was an absolute thing. I remember one of my closest friends, who I'm still friends with now. We're not as close, but we were really close in high school. Her boyfriend flat out asked her why she was friends with that black girl. And this was in high school. So, and remember, I went to a farm school. Watershed was a farm school. Bryden was a farm school, but remember, we were a tiny farm school in a tiny community, right? And my dad had a certain social standing in that community. So sometimes that, economics can help to sort of dilute what you see of that. Whereas when I moved to Watershed, it was a bigger school, farm school, and a lot of the deep racism, as you would know, and that deep entrenchment sat within that farming community, and everybody from anywhere was coming to that school. So you had people with all sorts of beliefs. And remember, we also still had apartheid happening in South Africa. Nelson Mandela was still in prison when I started school. And we had people from, that sort of mindset and thinking in our school environment. So yeah, it definitely was a thing. And still is a thing.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll get into that as well as we speak more. So from Watershed, that's when you moved to
So from Watershed, I then got my first job at Coopers and Librarian. So, at that point in time, you either became a doctor if you were a straight A student, you went off to the UZ, you became a lawyer if you were in arts, you became an accountant if you couldn't quite make, the medicine and engineering kind of space. And articles was cool. Like, you saw the chartered accountants with their suits and their little briefcases. You didn't realize how much work was involved in it at the time. So I started on that path. I talk about it in my book. There was a lady called Mrs. Knight who really taught me everything that I needed to know. But what I didn't know at the time was I'm dyslexic. I can't add. In school, I have no idea how I stayed in the A stream in maths. Like, that is a miracle that I didn't know I prayed for, but I don't know how God got me to pass O-level maths and everything else that I did. Because I can't see numbers the way other people can. I transpose numbers all the time. I transpose letters. And I didn't know that. But I was a high-functioning dyslexic child. And so I did struggle a bit initially with exams and things like that. So I switched careers. And I went more on the management accounting side rather than going on the auditing side of things. I then met my then husband at the time, and he and I were very young. We were very naive, and I was on the journey of leaving Zimbabwe. So I said to him, look, if you want to be on this bandwagon, we're leaving at some point. We had some really close friends who had the privilege of being expatriates, and they went to Singapore at the time. And so at that time, we were liaising with them. We were on, similar trajectory family-wise. We were very stable, and they moved to New Zealand. And so we moved there with them, but we actually had visas for Australia. And so we intended to move to New Zealand and stay there for 6 months, meet our friends, hang out, do all sorts of things. At the time in Zimbabwe, for a young couple, we had really good jobs. He was just one of these people who was exceptionally brilliant and secured really good opportunities at a very, very young age. We had our own house by the time we were 20. So we just had all of these things that were working really well in our favor that we had worked for that allowed us to have a soft landing overseas. And so when we got overseas, I got a job in New Zealand with Wellington City Council. So we stayed for 10 years. And that's where Tamuka was born. So that's kind of my pathway to overseas. And then when that chapter of my life was closing, I was trying to think, well, where do I go to now? So myself and my son and my nieces, I also had my sister's kids that I was taking care of at the time. We moved to Queensland, and that's how I came to be in Australia.
Wow. 6 months turned into 10 years.
Yes, 6 months turned into 10 years. And then I moved to Australia in 2010. And I've been in Queensland ever since.
So I'm thinking, so this is a small town girl from Zimbabwe moving into New Zealand. What was the experience like as you get into there in terms of opportunities and also being a woman of color? What kind of barriers did you come across as you got into New Zealand?
I was very, when I talk to other people about their challenges of moving overseas, mine were slightly different. Remember I said we had this couple, these awesome, beautiful friends of ours. They're my family. And so we lived with them for about, I can't even remember now. There was 6 or 9 months. I should have verified that before I said that. But it wasn't that long. It was probably about 4 or 5 months that we lived with them. And so that was our soft landing in that space. And so I also then got a job immediately. So I didn't struggle to look for work. I mean, I went for a job interview. I didn't think they'd hire me. And I didn't even have a work permit. I was on a visitor's visa. And at that point, when we went to New Zealand, for Zimbabweans, you could enter the country without a visa and stay there for 6 months. So that was the visa I was on. And Wellington City Council interviewed me, liked me, and they sponsored my work visa. And because I had a work visa, that then automatically allowed my spouse to have a work visa. But he wasn't going to work. He was doing his master's. And so he went off to Massey University to do his master's. I mean, he was doing the odd call center job. And I think that was a big adjustment for us because life in Zimbabwe was pretty cool for us. We had our own house. I had home help. We had 2 cars. We had a really good job. So our life in Zimbabwe was pretty good. And so I think that was an adjustment for us because we then moved, we were living with some friends. Then we moved into our own place just down the road from them, and we bought our first little car, and we did have experience a dip in income because obviously we had moved to a different place. We were now one household income because I was earning money and he was off at university. We did have our savings, but savings start to dwindle when there's international fees that are being paid. So that was probably the shock, adjusting to that. And the other shock was doing my own housework. That was a shock to the system. It's a shock to everybody coming out of the environment. So I then started to really appreciate a lot more the home. Like, geez, I used to wonder what you guys did all day. This is what you do all day, So that was an adjustment. In terms of the environment in New Zealand in and of itself, New Zealand's a very small country. We were in Wellington and there was very few Zimbabweans at the time. A lot of the Zimbabwean friends that I made then are still my friends today. So we have a group that we call Soul Sisters, and we have been friends through everything. We have raised our kids together. We have lost one of our own together. We have moved countries. We're all now here in Australia, except for one of us who is in PNG. We still come together for all of our meaningful milestone events. Our kids are friends. So we've created this family space away from that. So in terms of how New Zealand was for me, there was some shocks, but it wasn't this huge, massive work culture shock because I hadn't really worked for that long in Zimbabwe. Like I worked for Coopers and Lybrand, which then became Ernst & Young, and then I went to work for Zimbabwe Leaf Tobacco. I was only about when we migrated, I was 2 or 3 years into my working life. So I didn't have, that embedded work culture of this is the way you do things here. So I was more or less learning. And I think New Zealand formed the foundations of what is now my career and my values and my beliefs, because that's where I learned about social justice. That's where I started to really understand inequity. Even though in Zimbabwe you see it, you can pretty much ignore poverty if you choose to. And I don't say that arrogantly or anything, but I say that in the sense that you can live in your bubble and move around and see other people's lives as just being something that's going on over there. I barely knew a lot about, Northern African countries, apart from, where they are on the map. I'd never really traveled apart from, Southern African countries. So I'd been to South Africa a lot of the times. You stay in your own sort of regional lane. And if you get a little bit of money, it's, to go overseas to some Western country. There was no pride in your African identity and your African heritage because colonialism takes that out of you and you don't even realize it. And so I think what New Zealand did is I met so many people from Nigeria. I started to get to know about that place, the cuisine, and, the beautiful, colorful people from that country. I didn't know much about, Nigeria at that point. I learned about the Congo. Apart from the war in Zimbabwe, we knew about the DRC because of the war, because we were involved in that war effort. We knew about Ethiopia because there was time that we raised aid for them, but I didn't know anything about Ethiopian culture. I didn't know anything about. So New Zealand actually allowed me to learn more about my fellow African countries than about Western, because I met people and I was forced out of my comfort zone to try different things. And I also met some fantastic Māori people, fantastic people from all different parts of the world, because deliberately made an effort to, get involved in different communities and learn about things that I didn't know. So that sort of set the tone of how I've chosen to live my life since then, which is really, embracing difference and embracing diversity and really wanting to sit at the feet of people who've lived a different life and learn, well, what do you know that I don't know? How do you see the world? What can I learn from you? And how can my worldview grow by knowing you?
It's interesting that you speak about that coming to New Zealand made you appreciate other African countries and cultures. Because I had a conversation with someone and I was saying that to say, you get to meet other people from African countries when you come here, and you start, oh, okay, this is what happens, and you learn more about their culture way far away from home, but you start learning other cultures from within the region, which for me is interesting. So now we are in Queensland. Tell me about that. What's happening there?
Queensland for me, so when I left New Zealand, like I said, my life was at a crossroads. I was becoming a single mom. I was learning to navigate the world without the safety of what I had at the time. And I was trying to figure out who I was. So Queensland seemed like a place to be happy. And at that point in time, it kind of logistically made sense for the family dynamics that I had at the time. And so I moved here with my son and one of my nieces. Like I said, I had the responsibility of my sister's kids. They're all grown up now. They've got their own families, they're in a different space. And I also had my brother and my sister-in-law. So I love having my family around me. I kind of take them where I can, wherever I go. They're my safety net. And so when we moved to Queensland, I was literally starting again. So I moved here. I didn't know anyone here. Remember when I moved to New Zealand, that was a real soft landing. It was, a very different experience then. Queensland, initially when I got here, I was lost in so many ways. I had, lost my father who was... I'd lost my father a few years before then, but it took me a very long time to come to terms with that. Like I said, I was daddy's princess, still am. Yeah. He's just in a different place. But it took away a safety and a security that I didn't realize how deep the foundations of what made me feel whole was shattered by just his sudden death. And so when I moved here, I had to start figuring myself out. I had to find schools for my kids. I had to, because my son was 5 at the time and he didn't understand what's happening to his family. So I had to deal with that. And then I had my niece and I had all this responsibility and I was trying to figure out, how do I manage this on my own? How do I figure all of this out? And that was a challenge in and of itself. But I quickly then realized I have to get, a permanent job because in New Zealand, I had been doing consultancy work. I had transcended full-time employment and had the privilege of, looking at different opportunities. And those all kind of had to disappear because I had to stabilize myself. So I went to work for the Queensland government. And I met some incredible people in there. And that was probably the start of my career as a public servant. So I stayed in the public sector for a really long time. I stayed there for about over 10, 12 years. And I had some incredible opportunities. I worked on some fantastic projects. I learned to grow as a public policy person. I had done my master's in public policy in New Zealand. I furthered, my interest in public policy here. I learned how to write legislation. I learned how to do cabinet briefings and all of that. And for a person with dyslexia, I'm pretty proud of myself because I didn't have Grammarly and I used to make so many spelling mistakes, And so I then got more into the advocacy side of things. I met Tommy Adebayo and he ran an organization called the African Professionals of Australia. And he was someone who's still in my life. And I've been part of that organization on and off in various iterations for a long time. If you do any sort of searches around me, APA inevitably comes up. And that was really about creating a vibrant community of African people that are making a positive impact on the economy and the community. So that's what APA stood for. And I love that value. So I grew up in that community, and that's where a lot of my advocacy work started. I also then started, I've always had this real fascination for gender equity. And so that flourished a lot here in this space as well.
So how do all these experiences shape your leadership skills and just your views on leadership?
I think one of the things I've learned about leadership is it's very much, it's two things. I think from my personal perspective, it's how you choose to show up in the world and how you choose to embrace how others show up in the world.
Mm.
And why I define it in that way is because everybody's a leader in some way, shape, or form, right? We think leaders are people who are, leading an organization, who are doing all of... My mother was a housewife for pretty much a lot of her life. She ran that ship. She led that house. She is one of the strongest people I know. She taught me how to make decisions. She taught me how to organize myself. She taught me how to, run a household. Those are brilliant leadership skills. Yet how often are housewives looked over for the leadership skills that they have? And I mean, if you can manage a toddler, like pretty much you have some serious leadership skills. And I think I've also met, people who have led some of the some really amazing big organizations. And I've watched how these people navigate boardrooms, how they make, huge decisions. I have met with government ministers who make decisions that impact. It's, when you're a business, you're making a decision that impacts the people that you have influence on, the people that, are your consumers, the people that are working for you. When you're a cabinet minister, you are representing a nation in parliament. You're making decisions that impact a country and indirectly that impact the world, depending on, your portfolio, depending on all of that. So I've met such a wide array of people that I've had the privilege to learn from them and how they choose to pitch up in the world. And so that's why for me, when I look at somebody else and how they're showing up and how they're showing up in their different environments, I try to learn, well, what resonates with me, what sits with my gut and resonates to be true for me. How can I incorporate what you're saying and you're doing and you're emulating? And how do I put a Christine flavor on it so that it becomes true for me? So that's how really I've built my leadership. And one of the things I've learned is, as a fundamental basis of everything that I do, the spirit of kindness must come with it. Because one of the things that I learned pretty early on, and I watch Oprah a lot, so I might indirectly give her a credit for a quote. And the quote that I heard off her show was, people will forget your name, they will forget your title, but they'll never forget how you made them feel.
Yes.
So when you leave a room, how do you make people feel?
So good.
And I never wanted to leave a room and have people feel I was cruel and have people feel I was unkind. So for me, kindness is the biggest flex in leadership. I think it shows a level of depth of humanity if I can sit across the room from you and have a difference of opinion to you, may even fundamentally disagree with you, but I can extend a humanity and a level of kindness to you, because I think then we can meet each other on that common ground, because somewhere, somehow, there is that element in every single person. I believe it just shows up differently. And if you can connect with a person on that level, I believe you can do more than connecting with them on, butting heads, an eye for an eye. I just don't believe the world problems get solved that way. I don't even believe simple life problems get solved that way. But I believe if you can carry kindness, genuine kindness through everything that you do, and you can show up with that as a leading factor, I think the connections that you develop and the things that you learn will inevitably make you a better person. It does make me naive, and I've been told that in the world. It has led to people taking advantage of me, and that has happened. in business and in life. It happens, but I still would not change that part of me for anything, because it's also allowed me to be in spaces. It's even allowed me to be, referred to people like you, I believe, for this conversation. So I think for me, the fundamental element of leadership is kindness.
Wow, that's deep. So that brings me to Sisters in Color. What is Sisters in Color?
Sisters in Color for me is the legacy I hope to leave in the world. It started off as me just wanting to have conversations with women that I found fascinating. I just stalk people on LinkedIn and say, let's have a chat. It's had various names over the years. Migrant Women in Business Summit. I've held conferences. I've had face-to-face conversations. It's had so many iterations. But in the last about 8 years, I've settled on the brand Sisters in Color. Initially, when I was using the word migrant, it had the whole, people coming over here on boats. It had negative connotations and all of that. So I just wanted to take that element away from it. I love sisterhood in the sense that the power of women, there's nothing like it when you've got a group of women that really are for you. And I have a group of women that are really for me. Like, I have been through some things, and those women have held me up in places that they had no need to, apart from the fact that they care. And so I've experienced that. And so I wanted to know, how in business can we create that environment underpinned by that element of kindness? How do we bring leaders into that space? I also wanted to have conversations with women that I didn't see having conversations, being put in the spotlight. A lot of the women of color that I saw, the conversations, they were one-sided. They were telling one side of the story. They were just telling about our struggles, the things we'd been through. And it just made me say, but that's not our whole story. There's a whole bunch of women here who are thriving, who are leading organizations, who are making world-changing decisions. How do I bring that to fruition? And so I was gifted a book called 200 Women. And that book, 200 Women, is a book of, it's got everybody in there. Winnie Mandela's in there, Michelle Obama's in there, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is in there, Anne Hathaway is in there. They are these 200 phenomenal women that have changed and shaped the world, the way we see things, the quotes that we have, and all of that. And I was like, well, how do I bring that to, multicultural women? How do I elevate these women that I stalk on LinkedIn, these women that I go to lunch with, these women that I see in boardrooms? So that's really what we're trying to create with the Sisters in Color movement. And that's what the coffee table book is about. It's, it's a point in time story of 15 phenomenal women that are incredible in so many different ways, that are changing the world, that have this big story to tell. And the idea is, I want a little girl who is, Mexican, who is Asian, who is African, who is Indian, who is from all walks of life, to pick up that book and see someone who looks like them, who is in a leadership position, who's making decisions, who's a boss, and know that that's possible for her, because it's not representative or reflective of what Australian corporate culture looks like, or what Australian business looks like. It's not reflective of what those people who hold what I call the axis of power, the decision makers, they're not reflective. They don't look like me. Right? But there are women that look like me that are changing the world. How do we profile them? How do we highlight them? How do we build this community where we have these great mentors come together, and young women can be at the feet of these women and learning and growing, and we can be at the feet of these young women as well, vice versa. And how do we build this cross-cultural, multicultural community? Like I said, remember when I moved overseas, that's when I started appreciating diversity. That's when I really started appreciating that, difference really is the advantage.
So with that said, I'm thinking, so many women come from different parts of the world. You're highly educated. get into Australia, but it seems as if it might be difficult for them to break into the corporate space.
Yes, it is. It's not a might. It is.
Well, what's that about?
So when I was working in corporate government, so let's call it government, for the Queensland government, I had the privilege of, being at managerial level, acting director level. So I had leadership skills that I developed in that space. For a very long time, there was two African women as a government department at that level, and everybody else in the worker bee population. But that's not reflective. If you go to university and look at the international students, we're kicking it out the park, but it's not reflective in business. And there are a lot of women who have told me over the years, and I've interviewed a lot of people who talk about the barriers, and they exist. We cannot run away from them. Your name. Right. My first name is Rudairo. I use Christine. It's easier. Right. When the tax department calls me, I'm like, yeah. Just use Christine. Let's keep it moving.
Better that way.
Mudavanhu. That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
I have friends that are of Muslim faith. I have friends that cover and don't cover. How many people with the anti-Muslim sentiment that's been there since 9/11, how many people are hiring Muslim corporate women to be the face of their organization, right? If you look at the hate that's spewed around the world, the misinformation about that culture, because people just don't know, they don't understand. The persecution of Muslim people is just crazy around the world. You look at African women, right? Our accents, how many people are hiring women with dreadlocks to, profile their organization? How many people are hiring women who have a really strong, thick accent to profile and headline their organization? All of these things add up, and all of these things are barriers that are very real. You find that people will put up and tolerate and promote someone who sounds like me, because when I'm on the phone, sometimes people don't know what my nationality is, right? And so you find that doors do get open to you. One of the things that I learned, remember I talked about racism in school?
Yeah.
I learned to develop a pretty thick skin and ignore a lot of things without even realizing it. I was one of 4 or 5 African kids at Bryden at the time. Before that, I was at the Mad Hatter Primary School. There was like 3 of us. I was in a minority at Watershed, probably a slightly bigger minority, but it was still a white-dominated school because, as you know, in Zimbabwe, it went from color segregation to economic segregation, which again was still color segregation that just looks a different way. And that's, I guess, the way the world is anyway. And so I realized at that point in time, and I only realized it much, much later on, I'm very comfortable in a minority. It doesn't bother me because that has always been my reality. So walking into a room where I'm the only African person was a reality of mine since the age of 4 or 5. So it really, without knowing it, some of the things that would make other people with that environment was not their reality uncomfortable doesn't make me uncomfortable, because I developed indirectly skills about how to navigate myself in that world. And I remember I would have conversations with people and people say, that's very racist. And I'm like, no, it's not. That's just a joke, And so I had learned to look at things in a slightly different way. And did that mean that maybe I was blind to certain things? Probably. But when you've grown up in an environment where and a lot of this was in high school where you dealt with it in your face on the daily, you do learn different skills. And those skills later on, when you're confronted with things that maybe are subtle, you don't even see it because to you, you've had to overcome other things that were way worse. And so you're just like, it's like water off a duck's back and you're just kind of getting on with it. But we cannot run away from the fact that there is, unspoken racism in Australia. Like you you would have to be living under a rock to say that you don't see it. Or you would have to be one of those people who chooses not to acknowledge it. I am a single mother raising an African child who I've had to send to the UK for him to thrive, because he had police officers following him around, because my son is very defiant about wearing a black hoodie to the supermarket. And so he's been followed on occasion by policemen tapping him on the door thinking he's trying to rob something. And he's like, what? You know, I've had to deal with racism in school because of his hair and, you know, some of the private schools here that he went to, you know, so it's naive to not think that those barriers do not exist. They absolutely do. And part of bringing together Sisters in Color is to build a community of decision makers that can actually do something about it, that can actually change the face of corporate Australia and actually start to change a lot of those biases that exist in selection criteria, a lot of those biases that exist in interview processes, things that people don't talk about. I've got bias, you've got bias, right? The issue is not the bias. We all have bias. The issue is being unconscious to the fact that you've got bias. And so I did a lot of work in diversity, equity, and inclusion because I was really passionate about that. I worked with a company called People Tech Revolution, who are still doing this work around, you know, putting people in VR immersive experiences to actually get them to understand how bias actually impacts. It impacts medical decisions, you know. Even when I had challenges in the medical space, where I had my own health challenges, you find when you ask doctors about medical treatments that, you know, are unique and things that impact people of color, there's not a lot of research in that space. And the truth is, one, there's not the numbers, but the raw truth is there's also no votes in it. If you look at, you know, who's actually voting, who's actually, you know, where's the money, where's the investment, where is all going? So you end up in this space where bias is leading the way a lot. And that's why certain things remain the way that they remain. But when you start introducing people who buck the trend and ask questions and look at the world in a different way, then you start to dismantle some of those things.
It's a mouthful. So we speak of the women that inspire. But I want to look at inversely to say, how do young people who are looking to get inspired engage with Sisters in Color?
So that's where the podcast is easily accessible. It's on Spotify. I think one of the things that we're looking at is how do we actually grow this community? How do we, you know, have events that bring together women who can feel safe to share. So we've just had an International Women's Day event at Multilink Community Services. I have the privilege of chairing that organization, and we hosted a Sisters in Color event there. And that event was about sisterhood. It was about motherhood. It was about celebrating matriarchy. It was about celebrating the aunties in our community who have that, or, you know, that wisdom, you know, that wise auntie that you sit and they're like, they've got all these golden nuggets. They're telling you, you know, things that you haven't thought of. Girl, don't quite wear your skirt that short, wear it here. This is the perception. This, you know, things that, you know, people don't tell you. And things that, you know, our cultures teach us, and those aunties that can explain certain things to you in certain ways that you're like, okay. And I know we're changing, times are changing, you know, we're growing as women. What we wear doesn't matter as much, but it does matter too, because, you know, if you look at a famous celebrity, what's the first thing they get asked when they're on a red carpet? It's not, what is your degree? What is Michelle Obama talked about? It's like, when I became First Lady, nobody cared about, you know, what the fact that, you know, I went to Harvard too. I'm like, hey, Barack didn't go to Harvard. I went to Harvard too, you know. I went to Princeton. I've got, you know, all of these degrees. Nobody cared about that. They cared about, you know, who's your designer? What is that dress? How does it look? How is your makeup done? How is your hair done? And she actually released a book called The Look, I don't know if anybody has seen that. So how we present ourselves and how we show up in the world matters. We had the privilege at that event of really talking about motherhood and its impact on, raising us as leaders, our skills that we learn as mothers and our cultures, how we're almost the custodians of preserving our cultures through our children, and how are we navigating that pathway. We also shared things about war and all of these, deep and meaningful conversations. So in answer to your question, how can people engage with Sisters in Color? Engage with us through the events. Look us up, DM us on who we can have as a guest on the podcast. Who can we put into our next iteration of the book? What other things can we do that can start to create these safe spaces where women leaders of color can come together and we can support each other and we can lift each other up? That's really what Sisters in Color is about, is how do we create this global sisterhood where we are thriving and we are changing decisions. We are impacting the world in a way that influences culture, that influences that next generation, that advances the women movement in a way that it does start to reflect women of color as well. Because when you look at the feminist movement, a lot of it doesn't necessarily reflect women of color and their values, because all of those are different as well. And we talk about it through our sisterhood as well.
So now to the book. So, and congratulations on this. And it looks very nice.
Thank you.
Yeah, well designed. So tell me about the book. What's the inspiration behind the book?
Like I said, that book, 200 Women, was gifted to me. And when I was I knew I wanted to write a book, but I didn't know what I wanted to write it about. I didn't want to write an autobiography. I haven't felt like I've lived enough and done enough for people to be just wanting to know a monochromatic story about myself. So I wanted to see, how do I bring the stories about the women that inspired me? And I was going through a lot life-wise, and I needed a creative outlet, and that was the creative outlet. So I teamed up with Sam Hunter of Photo Hunter, and we met at a book writing convention. Julie Mason gifted me that book, 200 Women, and she said, I think this is the vision that you're wanting. This is what you're trying to create. And I wanted to create something that people would be proud to be in. People would be proud to gift. And I didn't want a paperback book that people would just put on a shelf and ignore. I wanted something that people would be proud to display in their home, that would be a conversation piece that somebody would read and a story would resonate with them. So we spent a lot of time. Color is a core part of myself. I love color. So I wanted color to be a core part of it. I didn't want it to be bland. I wanted it to be a piece of art, a statement piece. And so that's how the coffee table book idea came about.
So what takeaway are you hoping readers will go with from reading the book?
My name, Rudairo Rwamari, means an answer to a prayer. So I'm the answer to my parents' prayer. I never let them forget that. But what I wanted is, all of us are praying for something. All of us are looking for something, right? And what I hope, even if it's one person, that they read a story in there and that answers something for them that they're looking for, right? Because I think every woman is living a life, I believe, somewhere in the world that another woman is praying for. Right? And if you can meet that woman, what would you ask her? What would you want to know about her? What could she teach you? Like, for example, for me at the moment, one person I've always been interested in is Michelle Obama. And I'll tell you why. She's one woman who's achieved something that she was able to support, give up her career, right? Essentially become a housewife. That's what she was as the first lady. Let's just face it, call it what it is. Maintain her identity, keep her family together through what she talks about it. That was not easy. for her to do, right? She didn't even want to do that. Her dude dragged her kicking and screaming into that space. She was able to raise 2 kids whom I don't know these people. I've never met them. I only know what we're told of them, but they seem like decent human beings in the world, right? She has managed to now become her own person. She's, this world-renowned author. She is her own person. She's not subsumed. Barack is a huge person, but Michelle is huge too. But she's not lost in that. But she still has her family. She still has her sense of self. She still has her children. I want to know how she's done that. If I was to ever ask that woman that question, and she hasn't given up her feminine energy, but at the same time, she's a phenomenal leader, right? From what we know of her, she seems to be like a really good friend. And she seems to embody this kindness that is so important to me in everything that she does. She offers the grace. I mean, she tells us to, when they go low, we go high. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, Michelle, going high is really hard here today. I want to go in the weeds today, but you see it in that. And she really she doesn't take for granted the stage that she has and the influence and the impact that she has, at least in the way that she's chosen to show up in the world. So for me, the women that are profiled in this book they don't take their stage for granted. Like if you look at Dr. Nora Amath is one of the women that, is profiled in this book. She's been one of those women who really knows and understands and has a deep understanding of her faith, but has a deep understanding of how, the world is being impacted by war. And she talks about that. And not only does she talk about it, she lives it, and she runs organizations that are making a huge change and a huge difference around that, right? You look at Melissa, who is, leading medical organizations. She's a doctor. You look at Nazia Ali. She's a dentist. She has built, a dental training academy out of nothing. These are just 3 women that I've just picked off the cuff that are in this book. You've got Angela Ray, who is one of the very few women that I know who is into wealth management and, really heading the Chinese community in that space. She is a partner at Coda Capital, and there are very few women that are making those kinds of decisions that are at that level. You've got Ursula, who's a partner at KPMG, leading tax. I mean, just look at this plethora of women that are all brought together in this book. And if one of these stories can resonate with a young person who the world may be telling, that's not possible for you, they can read this book and see it is possible for me. I have my niece. She wanted to be a journalist at 19. She went for an internship at 9 News, and she kept calling me and she was like, Auntie Chris, I don't think they want me. And I'm like, why would you say they don't want you? She goes, everybody here is blonde. And it was completely and I was like, no, they're not. You're just exaggerating. They're not. She's like, no, they are. Go and have a look, And this was probably some 10, 15 years ago. Things have probably moved a little bit in time, but probably not so much. There was very limited diversity. And she went off and did another career because to her, there was no representation. So representation matters. It does have an impact. And so what we're wanting to build is a community that represents leadership in every single sphere, so that the young girl who wants to aspire to be that can see herself represented in that. And that is the takeaway that I want people to have from the book, from the podcast, that it's possible. Anything is possible for you.
You're a girl's girl.
I am a girl's girl.
I can see that.
And I'm a boy mom.
Yeah.
Don't forget, I have got Tamuka, and he can tell you that I can bat for him in ways that I said to him one day, I'm a lioness for things that I believe in. But for you, I am lioness. I am you know how massive I'm in Zove. For you, I can go to a whole different space and access a whole different resource because I am a mama bear. and I can protect my cub. And one of the things that really saddens me is the lack of support for the African boy child, and one of the things I've always tried to do is surround my son with men of color that are making good decisions, because the stereotyping of men of color and, how they abandon their families, how they abandon work, how they do, that is not the reality. That is not the men that raised me. That is not, how his father is. That is not how I know good, especially African men, that if I can talk about that small cohort, I know really good, phenomenal African men who are changing the world. And that is what I want my son to be, an African man who changes the world. But you need to surround him more. So I'm really glad you're doing this podcast and you're raising awareness. And hopefully we can see more men, African men, men of color coming through the conversations that you're having, and especially men from Zimbabwe, because I know for a fact that Zimbabwean women, we felt really let down by our men. And I really want to see that narrative change. I really want to see a phenomenal community of Zimbabwean men saying to the women, we've got your back. Relax, pipe down. You don't need to be so defensive. We've really got you. And I think it's starting to change. I think we're starting to see that. We're starting to see generation of change. But there is a lot of those old cultural beliefs, those old practices that have led to women not feeling safe in that space. And one of the things that I hope to do with my son is whoever he chooses to bring into his life is to create that safety space, to be that man who's walking around with integrity, making good decisions. You're going to make mistakes, absolutely, but own your mistakes and own them with integrity. Yeah, I was wrong. Yep. Own it. And when, as Maya Angelou says, when you know better, do better.
Do better. So good. So good. So let's speak about the beauty pageant that's coming up.
Nope. That is something. I've got this friend of mine. Have you got that friend of yours who they get involved in something and they call you? So I've got this friend of mine, and his wife said to me, how did he rope you into this? I said, your dude. I said, and he's like, I told him no. And then when he told me Christine's involved, I burst out laughing. I'm like, what did you sell her? What Kool-Aid did you sell her to get involved in? But it's for a really good cause, and it's celebrating Zimbabwe Independence Day and really looking at raising awareness around the vulnerable girl child and raising awareness around drug and alcohol abuse, and how that's not the end of all. You can make mistakes, but you learn from those mistakes, you build resilience. And how do you bring a community around to rally around and support the girl child who, for whatever reason has fallen into situations that have compromised her? How does that not become her complete story? And so the girls that will be participating in this pageant are part of an NGO called Shamwari Mwanasikana. And that charity is doing a phenomenal job in Zimbabwe of raising awareness and supporting the girl child to have a 2.0 story that is phenomenal. So it's really about bringing these girls into a space where their inner beauty, their inner resilience can be celebrated. I know pageants get a bad rap in the sense that, they're celebrating things that are superficial. But you can use a stage to actually raise awareness about a topic in a way that changes the narrative around what beauty is, that defines the narrative around what beauty is. And for these girls to be celebrated on a stage when, you thought you might not even have a life, to have people come around and say, you are beautiful. Inside and outside, you are worthy. You are worthy of us coming around and celebrating you. That is the spirit of what the event is about. So it will be hosted at the Bulawayo City Council Hall on the 10th of April.
Okay. That's on my birthday, so.
Oh, it's your birthday.
Yeah. I love that. I love that I think of late, drug and alcohol abuse have been a big problem in Zimbabwe, and I think having things like that happening is very good, and it to give people hope that even outside of the mistakes that you have made, you can still come back and do it right. So, what message would you, if you could give a message to the young lady that left Zimbabwe today, what would you say to her?
Oh, to my younger self.
Yeah.
Another question I ask. What would I say? It's in the book, actually. What would you say to what would I say to my 18-year-old self?
Yeah.
Girl, you're in for a ride.
Mm.
And just trust yourself, and it's going to be fine.
And to a young Rudairo who is in Chegutu or Kadoma, another small town in Zimbabwe, who might not have had the opportunities that you heard. And as you said, for you, leaving was a matter of when, not if. But then there's another Rudairo in Chegutu who it's a matter of if, not when.
Yeah.
What would you say to her?
Anything's possible. Absolutely anything is possible. But you cannot, and I'm not naive to say, for some girls, those barriers actually exist. They may never leave that place because the opportunities just may never present themselves. But wherever you are, try by all means to find your voice, wherever it is. I needed to leave and have a global stage. Not everybody needs to leave and have a global stage. Just find what it is for you that resonates and true for you, and fight for that. And I hope that that young girl has somebody who mentors her, who supports her, because we all need that. I have phenomenal mentors and phenomenal supports, starting from my parents. And I know that when you have good parental foundations, and I talk about it in the book, I say, there's a quote that I say, Ndiri mwana wa Rafael Namevis Saga, anything is possible for me. And I fundamentally believe that, because that's how I was raised. I was raised to believe, because I am Rafael Mudavanhu's daughter, anything's possible for me. And when you grow up with that belief, anything's possible for you. It doesn't matter what the outside world looks like. That is the thing that always centers me, because I know who I am, and I know whose I am, and I know who's responsible for me. So I hope that that young girl has that sense, because it's really, really important to have an anchor. And I hope that she has that anchor. And even if she doesn't, she can build that anchor for herself and find people who can help her to find that.
So what kind of world would you hope for the next generation of immigrant women to grow up in?
I'm never going to see gender equity in my lifetime. I'm just not. Bugger. I'm not going to see it. I'm not going to see it. But if we can have more women in leadership, I think we've achieved something. If we can have 1% more women in leadership tomorrow than we did yesterday, we've achieved something.
So where do we get this book?
So it's available on Shopify. I will send you a link to the book. We've also got a small satchel that goes with it. So it's an executive book. So it comes with the satchel itself, but we will send you the link of where you can get a copy of the book. And if you want to hear any of our past conversations with Sisters in Color, our podcast is on Spotify.
So people, Sisters in Color on Spotify, let's go listen to it and be inspired by the amazing stories of phenomenal women that are doing great things out there in the world. Christine, it's been an honor. Thank you so much for coming through. But I need you to give one word for that little girl again, somewhere out there in Zimbabwe. I don't know if she's in Binga. I don't know where she is, but what word would you leave for her?
You're enough.
Thank you so much, Christine. Thank you, viewers. And we hang out in the next podcast. Thank you.